It looks like many of us are in this for the long haul, so this is just a collection of my thoughts about designing meaningful physical education content for online learning. The purpose of this presentation is to acknowledge what just happened, talk a little bit about what is happening, but really it's designed to provide encouragement, support, and tips for you all so that you can manage to thrive during this time, ultimately so that your students can manage and thrive during this time. First, we need to acknowledge what happened. I think a lot of us were pretty comfortable in our perspectives about what quality physical education looks like and our teaching approaches, but that kind of got turned upside down, and we got caught off guard. We had to rapidly transition to unfamiliar and uncomfortable territory of teaching online, teaching from home, teaching with external challenges. But I think at the beginning, a lot of us thought it would only be for a couple weeks. The reality is that many of us are going to be teaching online indefinitely, which means students will be learning remotely indefinitely. Schools are at different places in terms of the expectations that they're establishing. However, the strategies that we applied for the stopgap for that 2-week period that we thought it might have only been, they're just no longer acceptable anymore. We need to rethink our approach. And we need to decide what needs to happen for ourselves as teachers and what needs to happen so our students have access to quality physical education experience during this time. And so one question to ask is, what are your school leaders expecting of you? I've heard from some PE teachers that they're being required to support classroom teachers in their provision of reading or mathematics, for example. Others have told me that they haven't heard anything, that they're being largely ignored. What do the expectations that are being placed on you mean for you? Regardless of those expectations, I think we need to decide what we can do for our students to support their psychological, physical, social well-being during this time. In other words, even if we are required to provide a support role, which is outside of our maybe expertise, we still have an obligation to our own content area. And how can we still provide students the support that they need with regard to their physical education experience during this time? We just got to make it happen. Classroom teachers don't have the luxury of choosing not to present quality, sequential, enriching content. They're expected to continue helping students develop their reading literacy, helping students develop their math literacy. And so we should set our expectations the same. Any effort less than the expectations required of classroom teachers, I think, is a missed opportunity to show and demonstrate our role in the school community, but also the heightened value of our content now and beyond the physical education context. Really, we need to settle in and proceed with a thoughtful, deliberate approach so that our students have access to quality experiences. And that might mean there are gaps in our skill, in our knowledge, in our attitudes that we need to address so that we can move forward in supporting our students. And so with that, we need to decide what a manageable strategy is so that we can work on filling those gaps. One suggestion I have is to keep it simple. Technology is kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak, or the big barrier. So if you have experience with technology, use the technology that you already know to avoid the stress of having to learn new technology. If you're uncomfortable, if you're resistant to technology for a long time, try to choose the technology with a short learning curve or technologies that your colleagues can support you in adopting. Again, that will reduce the stress of having to learn complex technologies for the long haul. If you're taking sort of a personal development approach to this experience, this might be a time to learn a technology that you've really wanted to learn but haven't yet. But whatever it is, use technology that will support your students, but that is also easy for you to use. Similarly, with the content and the themes that you choose content that you know, but think about expanding beyond that to content that you can learn or content that you can curate, for example. But anything we can do to reduce sort of the external stress of learning a new technology can help reduce the stress load. Think like a teacher. Identify the content that's meaningful to students during this time. Design a connected series of enriching, enjoyable experiences that align with their interests and motivations. It's not that different from what you should be doing or what you are doing in your face-to-face physical education classes. If you don't know what interests students, what motivates them, now is a great time to ask. Check out YouTube, design an online survey, put it through the learning management system, and then you kind of have an idea of what students might want or what they might expect during this time. And if the things that they're telling you, or the things that you decide, are things that you don't know, find quality resources to fill that gap and address their needs the best that you can. Teach. Technology is just the tool. Now that we can get over sort of the cloud of the novelty of teaching online, the technology barriers, the challenges associated with teaching at home, we can distill it and remember that teaching with technology is still teaching, and we're all teachers. The mode is a little bit different, or a lot different really, but it's still teaching. So we can rely on some of the processes that we're familiar with when we design quality face-to-face content. We can rely on those processes to design quality online content. So what strategies will optimize student engagement, enjoyment, motivation, and learning? They're online instructional strategies, but it's still instructional strategies. What is the role of assessment through all of this? And what are appropriate expectations for students? I've seen some fitness journals being circulated that require students to be physically active for 45 minutes every day. In my mind, that's a little bit heavy-handed surveillance, and it's definitely counterproductive if there's not an overarching umbrella of instruction as to why that physical activity is important. So we need to think about what the burden students are experiencing is right now with their other classes, what is appropriate for them for our content area. We might need to be nimble with our content. It's not a continuation of our typical physical education classes. So what other content might have heightened relevance during this time? Exercise psychology, exercise immunology, health technology. Some of these courses that we took as undergrads or as master's students might have heightened relevance. You might not be used to teaching that within your classes, but if we can return to those content areas, we might be able to find valuable content to deliver and to provide our students. Be nimble with your instruction. Again, this is not your typical PE class. It's probably clear to most of you that cognitive and affective domains are more naturally addressed through the online medium, but we still can invite students into movement experiences that are meaningful to them. So if you're explaining the value of physical activity, psychological wellness, and the improvement that students can experience in mood as a result of being physically active, you can then invite them into being active and being cognizant or being thoughtful about their mood throughout that experience. For example, think about what kind of mood you're in at the beginning of exercise. Go out for a walk and listen to a podcast or a comedy show or something. And then think about your mood after. Do you feel better? Do you think physical activity might have had something to do with that? These are just some ways that we can think a little bit outside of our normal instructional strategies to make the experience valuable to students during this time. And that might also mean being nimble with your role. You might want to consider becoming more of a knowledge broker than a knowledge disseminator. And what I mean by that is maybe it makes a little bit more sense for you to find quality instructional videos on YouTube or some of the education subscriptions that your schools have and provide those on your learning management system to students with maybe some overarching instruction related to why you're providing them, for example. So you're playing this idea of a knowledge broker where you're curating content and providing sort of the thread of consistency throughout that. You might need to translate some knowledge. So if we're talking the value of exercise psychology or exercise immunology, some of that's pretty technical in terms of scientific language that it uses. We can translate that to the practical to help students and parents and our community members understand the value. So that's what I mean by knowledge translator. And then we never want to forget our role as a motivator. We want to be encouraging, we want to be positive, and we want to motivate students to make good decisions that will help them experience positive outcomes. We also need to develop our filter and be mindful that there is very little evidence for effective online instruction in physical education at this time. And we can't assume that evidence from other subject areas translates to physical education because our content is very different. So what might be appropriate on an online math course, for example, might not be relevant to physical education. So we need to be mindful of the teachers, the scholars, and corporations never really considered and in many cases actively resisted online instruction as a reasonable physical education format till about a month ago. National organizations and a lot of the big Twitter accounts are making decisions on the fly about what quote unquote quality online content is and what they're developing. So we need to see that corporations and proprietary endeavors are rushing these online PE or at-home PE resources, conferences, and talks to capture audience, followers, and consumers when 1 month ago it wasn't even on their radar. So be mindful of what you're seeing, and just because there's a lot of followers or just because there's flashy corporate symbol doesn't mean there's quality necessarily, because the evidence is extremely limited at this time. So ultimately, I think err on the side of designing and curating enjoyable, individualized, manageable, appropriately sociable, and autonomous learning experiences for students. It's very similar in that regard to what we want to be doing in our face-to-face classes. If you do need to document assessment, I would encourage students' creativity and reflection versus physical activity surveillance, cognitive quizzing, and those things. We can provide meaningful experiences and we can document assessment in ways that are fun, in ways that are creative, and in ways that encourage reflection, maybe versus some of those more traditional assessment strategies. And think about ways that you can educate, support, and invite parents and guardians into supporting student wellness and their own wellness. And be encouraged. Okay, classroom teachers, corporate America, everybody's striving right alongside, working from home, doing the best you can. You're trying now, and with reflection and formative evidence and sort of an approach that your class and your physical education community is in action research, trust your gut if something's working and run with it. Okay, until a solid evidence base is built, which will take a couple years or more than that, you can trust your gut. If it works with your students, I think you can reasonably go. Once the evidence is being built, refer back to that, but still trust your gut with some of this stuff, because if it's working for your students, I think you can reasonably run with it. Just be a teacher. Use the tools you've been given to string together meaningful content to help students manage and thrive. And be mindful that the more synthesized your content and sort of the course that you're building right now, the higher likelihood it can be effectively used if this ever happens again. So we can plan for the immediate while also keeping an eye on the future. Hopefully that won't happen, but we can plan for the immediate and the future. And approach this iteratively, okay? Try to get better every week. Try to be reflective in your process and approach it as a process. These talks for me are part of my process. This is very unrefined right now. But every time we talk about it, every time we plan something, every time we, provide advice or information, we can kind of reflect back on it and make it better. So this is one example. It's a meta example. You're in the iterative process now. Just keep up the noble work. You all are doing a great job. I know it's hard. I'm right there with you. But feel free to reach out with any questions or to share your experiences. I want to help you all. I've been thinking about this a little bit longer than some people, but by no means am I an expert yet. I've just been thinking about it longer. So share your experiences, reach out with questions, and over the next decades, we'll build an evidence base and get us closer to effective online teaching down the road. Here's my contact information. Stay well, and I wish you all the best. Take care.